Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Today we're talking about medical fears, what's real and what's unreal. Do you really have to accept that as you age, your life will fall apart and you will just become more and more decrepit? Is that an American phenomenon, or is it a truly human phenomenon? I think it's important for us today to talk about what to expect in life as an adult, as a child, as an elderly person, as an aging person, as a retired person. What is the natural course of humans? Are humans designed to just become decrepit every year and fall apart and need doctors all the time? And I think it's very important to look at what are called incidence and prevalence, and we're not going to go into epidemiology, but the idea is that there are certain rates of illness that occur in humans. And unfortunately, in the United States, we've been brainwashed by measuring ourselves. And when we measure ourselves, as we get sicker and sicker, we start calling that normal. And we say that's what humans do. And no, it's not what humans do. It's what Americans do as far as aging and as far as the incidence of disease and the occurrence of disease. So if we look at humans and we look at Americans, we see there's quite a different rate among different populations, different cultures, different races, different areas of the world, different times of existence. For example, the Paleolithic or Stone Age versus the Neolithic, which is the new Stone Age. Paleolithic is the old Stone Age, and the dividing line for that was around 15,000, 10,000 years ago. It was with the advent of agriculture, when we started to not be hunter-gatherers and move around and settle down. We started to settle down and farm. And when we started to settle down and farm, we really started to mess things up in many ways. And there are ways that we could have done quite well, but we kind of went off in some goofy directions. Then there's the Industrial Revolution that was maybe 150 years ago it began, and that Industrial Revolution led to a whole load of problems that we start to talk about aging and life expectancy, and we pin numbers on aging and life expectancy from the Industrial Revolution, and we screw up our numbers and our statistics. So let me describe how you can retrain your brain to think about what you can really expect if you take care of yourself as you age. So when a person is born, there is a certain statistical amount of how much illnesses should happen in a population. And if people are fed well, if people are fed healthy foods without chemicals, if they've got enough proteins, fat, carbohydrates, if they've got trace minerals, if they've got saturated fats, if they control their refined foods, the incidence of disease is quite low. And in fact, I think when you look at cancer, which is one of the scariest diseases, one of my favorite instructors, Dr. Patrick Quillen, many years ago described in Beating Cancer with Nutrition, one of his books, that the rates of illness for cancer, of all types of cancer, were extremely low when people had good nutrition, especially when mothers had healthy nutrition before they gave birth to their babies. So if we can keep pregnant women and cultures healthy before we have babies, then we will have a very healthy culture. Now that's not to say that people that are born with illnesses should be treated badly. It just means that we need to give them those nutrients, of course, after they develop illness. So if you've already been born and you're already kind of sickly, then what you want to do is try to give yourself really two things. You want to get rid of the bad stuff and you want to give yourself the good stuff. So you've got to detoxify, but you don't want to detoxify willy-nilly. You want to detoxify based on lab tests and based on what you're exposed to. So you want to test yourself for things like heavy metals. You want to test yourself for things like man-made solvents. You want to test yourself for infections. You want to test yourself for mold exposure. And these are all readily done in today's world. They're not terribly expensive, although they can be hundreds of dollars. And then you can begin to detoxify. The difficulty is if you begin a long detoxification, or if you begin to fast for a long time, more than a couple days, you might find yourself deficient. Now, a lot of people have asked me about the fact that, the Bible talks about how people could fast for 40 days and 40 nights, and I've got people that I know that can't fast for 20 minutes or go 2 hours between meals. They've got to eat like a bird and have little meals every so often. In fact, the chronic pancreatitis patient really needs to eat many, many, many small meals throughout the day because they've got an insufficient pancreas output. That's different than acute pancreatitis, and you should watch my other video about that. So the idea of a person being able to fast and heal themselves of diseases like cancer and diabetes and all kinds of stuff really is related to making sure that they have enough nutrients. So what a person might have to do is they might have to fast, if they choose to fast, is they might have to fast or detoxify with some kind of supplemented fast or supplemented detoxification. They might not be able to just detoxify and suck the bad stuff out of their body without replacing the good stuff because they just don't have the reserves. So if you are a person that thinks you might not have enough reserves and you just can't endure any of the natural treatments that your friends do, think about this. You might be deficient in minerals. You might be deficient in trace minerals. You might be deficient in vitamins or proteins, amino acids. You might be deficient in omega-3 fats compared to omega-6 fats. And you might be deficient in saturated fat because in the United States, from about the 1950s and 60s, we had a war on saturated fat because we thought it caused heart disease, and it doesn't, not by itself. We also have had an increasing amount of refined carbohydrates. Certainly in the Paleolithic age, carbohydrates were at least 65%, or maybe most 65% of the diet. That's a lot, but it was not refined and it was not mostly grains because the Stone Age was more than 10,000 years ago. The Paleolithic or Stone Age was more than 10,000 years ago. That was before agriculture, before we really settled down and grew plants and harvested them year after year and stayed in the same place. We were nomadic and we moved around. And if there were enough animals, we were in quite a good shape to eat. And we would, of course, harvest a few things. And there were grains and grasses and other types of plants that grew, and we would collect them as we would go by. But we weren't farming them. We were just kind of opportunistically finding them. And that's really how beer was invented. The first beer was essentially people that were hunter-gatherers moving around, gathering some seasonal grains and grasses, putting them in pots, letting them get wet from rainwater, and having them ferment and form the first beer, which was one of the first foods. I'm not saying everybody should go out and have beer, but beer has been with us for a long time. The idea of fermented plant products and the history of beer is a really, really interesting thing. We'll do another one on that. If people didn't get a chance to get their nutrients they needed, they would eat too many plants and they would get problems. The problems were compounded when we moved from just eating plant foods to eating refined plant foods. And that was with the advent of, grinding grain. And that started in Egypt. So that was thousands of years ago. But more recently, we have had commercial industrial refinement of food, and of grains especially, and our guidelines have included up to 6 servings a day of grains. That concept has really hurt us when you combine deficient minerals, excess heavy metal toxicity, excess exposure to tens of thousands of chemicals that are in the environment that are approved by our agencies, and you add an omega-6 excess with omega-3 deficiency, and an excess of PUFAs, or polyunsaturated fatty acids, in the absence of enough saturated fat to make healthy cells. So when you mix all that together, you get a lot of disease. And the disease will be different for each person. So this same milieu, this same problem of deficiency and excess of certain imbalances will lead different people to have different diseases, but it's the same fundamental problem. So some patients may have depression or anxiety, and another patient may have cancer, and yet another patient may have diabetes, and yet another patient may have heart disease. But it all may be caused by the same thing. So what I'm here to tell you is that if we want to have healthy societies, we have to take the ill and give them the right detoxification and the right foods in the right proportion. And we have to help people so that when they make babies, that they produce healthy babies from the start that have less incidence of disease throughout their lives. And when we look at the aging process of our elderly in the United States, we've got to face this fact that age is not a pathology. That as our population ages and we see people's rates of disease increase, we have to realize that that may not be the aging process, that may be the deficiency process of how a person falls apart very slowly from chronic disease because they don't have what they need and they've got too many toxins in their body. So we've got to find ways of measuring and helping people in large numbers in an economical fashion. We've got to find inexpensive ways to test people and feed people and detoxify people as they age so that we don't bankrupt our system as the elderly baby boomers go through the system in the United States. And certainly other countries have to face this. This is not something that's alone to us. This is happening in China, this is happening in India, this is happening in the United States. And in fact, you might note that in India, cancer rates are a lot less than they should be given the hygiene and the population size and some of the poverty that's there. And that may be related to some of the wonderful herbs and dietary choices that are available in India. Not that there isn't some pretty big poverty there too, but you have to question. My key message here is that you have to question the narrative when you see things in public health that tell you just have to accept these illnesses, take these drugs, do these procedures, go to these chiropractors and physical therapists because you're going to fall apart as you age. I am seeing more and more and more people in their 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and 100s who are healthy, who are sexy, who are lean, who are skinny, who are losing weight, who are achieving success. They're getting dental revisions and getting the crap out of their mouth and cleaning up bad root canals. They're going after all of the duties that you have, the housekeeping that you have to take care of these bodies as you age. And it's a very exciting thing to watch. And we're going to bring you more and more of these stories from around the world. In conclusion, medical fear may not be what we think it is. The actuaries who calculate illness rates and insurance rates are doing that based on our system of healthcare and eating and education. If we change that, we might have different actuarial numbers about what to expect for deaths. So if someone rebuts me by saying, Dr. Pierce, these are the rates of cancer and illness and heart disease, I'm going to say, why? Have we explored that? Have we absolutely explored that? And the answer right now is not fully. So my message is I want you to have hope that there may be ways for people who are already elderly and ill to get well. There will be ways for people that are adults that can go into their happy retirement years and take care of themselves and have many, many decades of pleasure and joyful use of their bodies and their minds without decay and decrepit features. And that parents that have children may not have to have the high rates of fear that there will be so many birth defects and difficulties that happen in childbirth that the rates will go back to what they're supposed to be. The rates of illness are usually very, very low when a population is cared for and taken care of regarding toxic exposure and nutrient supply.